Edward was looking at the flickering light in the hospital room, trying to ignore the smell of antiseptic and the throbbing pain in his left arm. He lost count of how many times he had been here, donating blood for Thomas. He's doing so much better this past months. I'm happy for him. This was the only thought that kept him going through all these medical procedures. Thomas was healing, slowly but surely. Maybe he will be completely cured in the near future. This thought was bittersweet, because when Thomas will be healthy, Edward will have to disappear from his life. Edward closed his eyes and remembered the events that led to his current situation. Thomas came from a well-off family and was Edward's brother's best friend. Edward met him a few years ago when Michael brought him home. They went to school together, so Thomas came by often for school projects or just to study together with Michael. He was tall, handsome, funny, good at sports, smart and kind. People would constantly seek his company. Edward watched him from the side, his heart fluttering every time their eyes accidentally met. He didn't dare talk to Thomas more than 2 or 3 words, and only if asked. He felt small and insignificant next to this school idol. Then, one day, everything changed. Thomas fell ill, couldn't continue his studies anymore, could barely stand. Edward didn't understand the medical terms, but he understood that Thomas needed frequent blood transfusions, maybe even a bone marrow transplant. Everyone who knew Thomas got tested. They all wanted to help. When the results came back, Edward was a perfect match. That day, Thomas's parents came to their house with a contract. They offered to pay off Edward's family's debts and Michael's college tuition. In exchange, Edward would have to be a live-in caretaker for Thomas and donate blood whenever necessary. But they didn't want Thomas to know about the donation part. They were afraid that Thomas would become emotionally attached to Edward because of it, so they would present it as Edward accepting a caregiver job and being paid for it. Edward naturally agreed. He had long accepted his love for Thomas, and this was an opportunity to be close to him and actually help. Although he knew that Thomas would never see him as more than Michael's little brother, he was secretly happy. He moved in with Thomas the next day. Thomas was visibly displeased with their arrangement, but didn't have the strength to oppose it. Edward took care of Thomas diligently. He cooked meals that Thomas could actually eat. He cleaned. He stood by his side through the worst days, just present and ready to offer support if needed, accompanied him for the transfusions, helped him bathe, though that was a battle in itself, since Thomas didn't want to be touched by him. And through it all, he went to the hospital for blood donations before going grocery shopping or running dry cleaning errands and returning to his caregiver duties. Months passed. Thomas was getting better, looked healthier, got his university degree, even slowly started managing his family's business, working from home at first, then going to the office for an hour or two, then for half a day, and now he was working full-time. Meanwhile, Edward was getting weaker and exhausted. Frequent blood donations left him dizzy, pale and nauseous. He barely had enough energy to get through the day without looking like he was going to collapse. He was still managing Thomas's household, but now he was more of a live-in assistant than a caregiver. Just a little more, he said to himself. Thomas is almost healed. He will soon go back to a normal life. "You're all done for today, Edward," said the doctor while removing the needle from his vein. Edward looked at his arm, bruised and slightly swollen, fresh and old needle marks visible on his skin. "I look like some sort of addict," he thought to himself, before pushing that thought away and turning to the doctor. "How is Thomas doing, doctor? Is there anything else I can do for him?" "He's doing well," the doctor replied. After a short hesitation, he continued. "There is something you could do, but not right now." "What? Why not now?" Edward almost jumped out of the chair, his heart beating wildly. Thomas is now stable enough for a bone marrow transplant that could heal him completely. The problem is that you are too weak to undergo the procedure. You must first rest and recover from the blood donations before attempting anything else. Nutrition is also important. You've lost weight these past months. "I'm fine. I want to do it. I'll sign anything. You don't have to worry about me." Words poured out before Edward could stop and think about what the doctor said. Just knowing that with one bone marrow donation Thomas could be cured, he was ecstatic. "Edward, slow down. Your health is also important. You don't look well." "I'm fine, doctor, thank you. When can I come for the bone marrow donation?" The doctor sighed. "Let's schedule it for next Thursday, 8 o'clock. You must come in early for your checkup and preliminary blood work. You must also meet with the anesthesiology team. Thomas will come for his transplant on Friday. I'll call him and explain the process." "I understand. I'll be here." Edward left the hospital in a daze. He now had to start planning his own life. He had some savings from when he worked part-time during high school. It wasn't much, but he could find a one-room apartment for a fair price and still have something left for daily expenses if he budgeted well. It was enough to last him a few weeks until he could find another job. When he entered the apartment carrying 2 heavy grocery bags, Edward found Thomas and Michael chatting happily over a cup of coffee. Thomas looked relaxed. He had removed his tie, unbuttoned his shirt, and his sleeves were rolled up. His dark hair was a bit messy, his eyes shiny. But when Edward entered the room, a layer of coldness covered his features. "Hi, Eddie. Haven't seen you lately," Michael greeted him. "Hi, Michael. Yeah, it's been a while. Are you staying for dinner?" "I'll go make something quick," said Edward, then turned towards Thomas. "Is there anything specific you want to eat?" "Whatever is fine. No need for anything overcomplicated," Thomas replied as his eyes flashed with something sharp. Anger? Annoyance? Edward couldn't tell. "Hot pot it is," said Edward, and went straight for the kitchen to prepare the food. He knew that since he got better, Thomas couldn't stand his presence for more than a few minutes at a time, so he always made himself invisible, useful, but out of sight. "You look like hell," Michael's voice echoed behind him. "Thank you. You look dashing yourself. I'm not joking. You look ill." Michael was now standing next to him, his voice full of concern. "I'm just tired," Edward replied. He didn't want to lie to his brother, but he couldn't tell him the truth either. The truth was, he was barely standing. His vision was blurry, his stomach was in knots, and he had a splitting headache. He really wished he could go to his room and sleep the pain away. But there was still work to be done before he could do that. He sighed inwardly and continued chopping vegetables. "This needs to stop." Michael passed his fingers through his hair, anxiously. "What?" "This." He gestured vaguely. "All of this. You're running yourself into an early grave." "I'm fine." Edward's vision was now so blurry, he wasn't sure if he was chopping onions or his own fingers, but the absence of pain told him it was the onions. "You're not fine." "The debt is paid. You have your business degree and a good job. I have some savings. We are all fine." Edward looked at his brother with tired eyes, unwilling to continue the discussion. "What's going on in here?" Thomas appeared in the doorway with a frown. "Michael was just telling me he doesn't really like onions. You two should go to the dining room. I'll bring the food in a minute." Edward let out a sigh of relief when he saw them gone. He gripped the counter tightly, trying to steady himself, and stood like that for a long moment. When he felt more in control of his body, he went to the dining room, served Thomas and Michael, and finally sat down. But before he could take 2 bites, there was a knock at the door. "Oh, you're still here," Patricia growled when Edward opened the door for her. Patricia was the head of PR for Thomas's company and also his associate. She was rich, proud, and beautiful, and clearly head over heels for Thomas. Or his money, it was the same for her. The first time Edward met her, he was having breakfast with Thomas. Patricia looked absolutely offended to see the help eating at the same table as the master of the house. In her opinion, servants must eat in the kitchen, where no one could see them. One time, she even cornered Edward, while Thomas was searching for some documents in his study. "I see the way you look at Thomas's," she hissed. "You're literally drooling over him. Do you really think he would look twice at a nobody like you?" she continued, looking at Edward like he was dirt on her shoe. "He is my fiancé. Our families arranged it. We're only waiting for him to get better before we announce it." "Then you have no reason to feel threatened by me," Edward replied, though he felt numb inside. Thomas had a fiancée. Of course he did. He wasn't going to stay single forever, and a merger of family fortunes was a common thing in his world. "Make yourself useful, will you?" Patricia passed by him, throwing her coat in his face, and went straight for the dining room. "Thomas, darling, I hope I'm not intruding. I see you have company." Her smile was so bright it could be seen from space. "This is my best friend, Michael. Patricia, my associate and head of PR. You can join us if you want to." Thomas kept a straight face. It was impossible to know if he was displeased or not with Patricia's intrusion. "I'll get a plate for you," said Edward, while taking away his own plate from the table. "Where are you going?" Thomas held his wrist firmly. "You haven't eaten." He was looking at Edward with an intensity that made him uncomfortable. "Yeah, Eddie, you barely touched your food. Are you unwell?" Michael also seemed surprised by his retreat. "I'm not hungry." "If he's not hungry, you can't force him to eat." Patricia shoved Edward to take his place at the table. "Now, Thomas, darling, we must talk about the meeting with the Johnsons next Thursday. If we get them to invest, it will be a great deal for us." Edward went straight to his room. He was starving and he really didn't have the energy to keep going. He collapsed on his bed and let the world spin around him until he fell asleep. He couldn't tell how much time had passed until he heard a knock on his door. It was light, almost hesitant. Edward forced himself to get up and was instantly hit by a wave of nausea. He had to take several deep breaths before he was able to stand, then crossed his room on shaky legs. When he opened the door, he met Thomas's controlled expression. "Has everyone left? I'll go clean up." "Leave it, there's no rush. I already did the dishes." Thomas's gaze never left Edward's face. "What's wrong with you? You've been off for weeks. If you need a break, just tell me. There's nothing wrong." "Don't lie to me." Thomas's words came out sharp, almost angry. Edward couldn't breathe, pined in place by those piercing grey eyes. "I'm fine." He tried to sound convincing, but his voice was shaky. Thomas looked at him for a long moment, then exhaled slowly. "I'll take you somewhere tomorrow. Be ready at 6. He walked away toward his room, then turned around. "And Edward, get some rest. There's no need for you to do anything else tomorrow." The next day, Edward slept until noon. It was the first time he allowed himself to sleep until his body decided it was enough. He made himself a nutritious lunch and enjoyed it slowly. Then he spent 2 hours deciding what to wear. He didn't have many things. A single suit, the one he had bought for his high school graduation, a few t-shirts and sweaters, 2 hoodies and pants. Thomas didn't tell him where they were going, so it was difficult for him to decide. He finally settled for dark pants and a soft brown sweater that complemented his honey-coloured eyes. This should be acceptable, he thought before going to the living room. Thomas was already waiting for him. In black pants and a crisp white shirt unbuttoned at the top, he looked effortlessly handsome. Edward had to remind himself to breathe. Thomas looked at him from top to bottom, then smiled. "Let's go." The ride in the car felt intimate. Thomas was driving, Edward was in the passenger seat, and there was soft music playing in the background. "This feels like a date," Edward thought before laughing at himself for having such ridiculous thoughts. When they entered the concert hall, Edward's eyes widened in surprise. "It's a candlelight concert. Michael told me you love art and classical music. Happy birthday." Edward was stunned. He had completely forgotten about his birthday. He opened his mouth to say something, but before he could make a sound, a voice echoed near them. "Thomas, darling, why didn't you tell me you were coming?" It was Patricia, in a splendid red dress and high heels, covered in diamonds, looking like she had just gotten off a fashion runway. "I must introduce you to our family friends. They are highly successful real estate investors." She dug her nails in Thomas's arm and dragged him away. Edward found himself alone in a sea of people, while Thomas disappeared from his sight. Everything felt surreal. He slowly turned around and walked towards the exit. "Where are you going?" A warm hand grabbed Edward's wrist. Thomas was standing so close that Edward could feel his body warmth. He was looking at him intensely, slightly frowning. Edward's throat felt like sandpaper. He swallowed hard before responding. Networking is important for you, business. I understand that, don't worry about it. I'll just go back home. No! Thomas was obviously upset. I didn't come here to network. This is my gift to you. Unless you don't want to see this concert with me. How could Edward not want to spend time with Thomas? Just seeing him from afar made Edward happy. Then let's go in. He smiled at Thomas. Thomas seemed to freeze for a second, then guided Edward to the VIP section, never letting go of his hand. The concert was beautiful. Edward enjoyed himself without restraint. On the way home, he couldn't stop talking about it. His eyes were bright, and colour finally returned to his pale cheeks. Did you have a good time? Thomas asked when they reached his bedroom door. I did, Edward replied. It was the best birthday ever. Thank you. Thomas's eyes lingered on his rosy lips. Then his fingers gently brushed Edward's cheekbone. The touch was electric. Edward almost gasped. Good. Sweet dreams, Eddie. Thomas turned around and walked away, leaving Edward stunned. I must be so happy I'm hearing things, Edward thought. He never calls me that. The next day, everything went back to their usual routine, and Edward became convinced he misheard. The bone marrow donation day was rapidly approaching, and Edward was busier than ever. He found a small one-room apartment and paid for 2 months in advance, then meticulously planned his budget so that what remained of his savings would last as long as possible. He had no idea when he would find another job, so he had to be careful. On Wednesday, Thomas came looking for him in the kitchen. In the last few days, Edward spent most of his time preparing meals and refrigerating them so that Thomas could have balanced, ready-to-go food after his transplant. Patricia and I have a business dinner with the Johnsons tomorrow, and I want you to come with us, he said, while Edward was portioning an apple pie. Why me? You should take some of you managers to this kind of dinner. Their daughter has a degree in visual arts and is about your age. I think you two have common interests and could spend some quality time while we talk business. I see. Edward kept his expression neutral. He was already thinking how to juggle post-operative pain and a formal dinner. Besides, Thomas continued, Friday I'll have my bone marrow transplant and we will not be able to go out for a while. They found a donor? Yes. I'm really happy for you. Edward gave Thomas a genuine smile. I have some errands tomorrow morning. I'll leave your breakfast on the table. Okay. Thomas looked at him for a long moment, then turned around and went back to his home office. Early Thursday morning, Edward went to the hospital. He went through the motions in a blur. Checkup, blood work, medical appointment. Then he was on the operating table and the world went dark. He woke up to nausea, dizziness, and a throbbing pain in his right hip. You're awake. The doctor came in smiling. Everything went well. The side effects from the anesthesia will wear off in a few hours, and I'll give you a prescription for pain medication. When can I leave? I would like to keep you overnight for observation. Dizziness is common, and you could hurt yourself. There is no need for that. Thomas hired a nurse for post-operative care at home, Edward lied smoothly. And the driver will pick me up. Okay, I'll prepare your discharge papers, but I want to see you for a checkup next week, and if you feel anything wrong, you come in immediately. All right, thank you, doctor. A couple of hours later, Edward walked out of the hospital with a discharge paper in his hand and painkillers in his pocket. He took a taxi home, then slowly walked to his room to rest. He couldn't shake the nausea and dizziness, and the pain wouldn't let him settle into a comfortable position. When the time came, he got dressed slowly. The suit hung loosely on him. His eyes were too bright, his movements stiff. He waited until the very last moment to take his painkiller and slipped another one in his pocket, just in case. This will have to do, he whispered at himself in the mirror. Thomas was already waiting for him. He was impeccably dressed in a perfectly tailored suit. Edward looked cheap by comparison. The dinner was at a high-end restaurant. The food was perfect, the conversation pleasant, but Edward couldn't concentrate. The throbbing pain in his hip grew sharper, and was now radiating in his leg and spine. He started sweating, his vision blurry. Edward excused himself to the bathroom where he took the painkiller and splashed cold water on his face. Afterward, he retreated to the terrace, now visibly limping. He held the railing tightly, letting the cold air ground him. "What's wrong with your leg?" Edward didn't need to turn around to know that Thomas had come looking for him. "I sprained my ankle, nothing serious." "You're lying to me again." Thomas grabbed Edward's arm just where the IV drip had been during the operation, and Edward flinched. "Talk to me. I can't help you if you don't." Thomas looked at his face intently, a hint of desperation in his voice. "I think I'm coming down with a cold," Edward whispered, strength slowly leaving his body. "You'd better stay away from me. You have surgery tomorrow, and you don't need my germs." Before Thomas could say anything, Patricia made her way toward them. "Thomas, darling, there you are. Everyone is asking for you." "Don't call me that," he replied coldly. "This is a business dinner, not some social event. Besides, I'm not going back. Edward is unwell. I'll take him home." "If he's sick, he can go home by himself," Patricia hissed. "We need you here. I can't close this deal on my own." "What did you just say?" Thomas's voice was laced with cold fury. "She's right," Edward said. "You must stay. I'll take a taxi and rest until tomorrow." Thomas hesitated. "Call me if you need anything. Anything at all." "I will. Now go back." As a reluctant Thomas made his way back to the dinner table, Edward returned to the apartment and finished packing his bags. After he efficiently erased all traces of him from Thomas's apartment, he left his keys on the office desk alongside a note that said, "I wish you well, Thomas. Thank you for everything. P.S. There are frozen meals in your freezer. If you don't like them, just give them away. No need to force yourself." Half an hour later, Edward was sitting in his small apartment, taking in the sounds and smells of the building, as well as the cold. "The heater doesn't work properly," the building administrator told him. "Someone will come to take a look at it next week." Edward laid slowly on the bare mattress, trying to ignore the pain sweeping through his body, and finally allowed himself to break down. He cried his pain, his one-sided love, his almost non-existing future, his fear, his rage. He cried until he fell asleep from sheer exhaustion. Thomas was sitting in his hospital room, waiting for surgery, feeling extremely anxious. But it wasn't the surgery that made him anxious. It was Edward's absence. He hadn't seen him since the dinner, and he couldn't get him out of his mind. Something was terribly wrong with Edward. Was he sick? Dying? Did he receive some bad news? Before Thomas could spiral further, he was taken to surgery. "Congratulations, Thomas." The doctor entered his room with a radiant smile. "Your surgery went well. Your prognostic is excellent. This might be one of your last visits here. Edward was a great match for you. It's amazing to find such degree of compatibility between unrelated individuals." Thomas received this news like a physical blow. Edward was my donor." "Yes. Every blood transfusion and the bone marrow, it all came from him. Since we're talking about your transplant, tell Edward I absolutely want to see him next week. The only reason I let him leave after surgery was because you arranged post-operative care for him at home. He is anemic. He must rest well and eat well. And I also have to adjust his pain medication." Suddenly, it all made sense for Thomas. The limping, the excessive paleness, the stiffness. When did he have surgery? Yesterday, of course. The doctor was surprised. Then realization dawned on him. "You didn't know?" No, Thomas didn't know. He felt like the worst person on earth for not noticing, for not protecting Edward, for not stopping him. "When can I leave?" He had to see him, touch him, make sure he was well. "In a few days. You must remain under observation, and we must run tests to make sure everything is progressing smoothly. Leaving sooner is out of the question." The doctor left no room for arguing. "I understand." After the doctor left, Thomas took his phone with shaking hands. He dialed Edward's number. He needed to hear his voice. No answer. He tried again and again, panic growing with every attempt. Then he called Michael. "Hi, Thomas. How do you feel? Everything okay?" Michael sounded cheerful, but also worried. "Why didn't you tell me Edward was my donor?" Silence stretched before Michael's voice came through the phone again. "We all signed NDAs. I couldn't. You watched him give away everything he had piece by piece, stretching himself thin, and you said nothing. How could you? Thomas, ask your parents. I really can't discuss this with you." "I'm asking you." Thomas was screaming at this point. "I already know about it. I just want the details. I'll deal with my parents later." "Fine. I'll come over after work and we'll talk about it." Michael's voice was tired, barely audible. "Do you know where he is now? He's not answering his phone. He must be at your place, resting. Thomas, he's exhausted. Let him breathe. I'll check on him before coming to the hospital." But Edward wasn't at Thomas's place and he wasn't answering his phone. Thomas almost went mad after finding his note and keys on the desk. He no longer went to work. He spent his days searching the streets for any sign of Edward, posting missing person signs. Michael was doing the same. Meanwhile, Edward had collapsed in his apartment. He had been running a fever for the past 4 days. He had no food, no money for medical bills, and no one to call for help. His phone had died, and he couldn't move. "I wish I could see Thomas one more time before I die," he thought. Unexpectedly, Thomas's face appeared in front of him. Oh, so dreams do sometimes come true. Then darkness took him. Edward opened his eyes with difficulty and took in the scene. He was lying on a soft bed, a warm blanket draped over him, golden light filtering through closed curtains. His body felt heavy, but there was no more pain. "Welcome back." Thomas was sitting in a chair next to his bed, his hand covering Edward's. "Where am I?" "Hospital. Private room. You were in septic shock. The doctor said you were hours away from dying. We were lucky to have found you in time." Thomas was now crying. "Why didn't you tell me about the contract, the donations? You should have said something. I never wanted you to feel indebted to me. Besides, I got paid generously." "Liar. Your parents got paid. Michael got paid. You didn't get a single cent. You gave me everything for nothing." Edward turned toward Thomas with tenderness in his eyes. "I got everything I ever wanted." "What?" Thomas was stunned. "I've liked you for a very long time, Thomas. I would have given you my blood and bone marrow without the contract, without the money. None of that matters to me. I got to be close to you, to help you when you needed someone. These past months were the happiest I've ever had." Thomas looked like he was about to be sick. "I'm sorry, Thomas. I know this is disgusting to you. I know you can't stand having me in your space. That's exactly why I left. Once you didn't need me, I wasn't going to impose my presence on you. Live your life and be happy. That is all the thanks I need." "You idiot!" Thomas was shaking. "Did I ever say I find you disgusting? I kept my distance because I can't control myself when I'm near you. Whenever I see you, all I can think about is kissing you, holding you, protecting you, giving you everything I am and own." "Now I know I'm really dead," Edward whispered. "You would never say that to me." Thomas didn't talk anymore. He kissed him gently, slowly, deeply, pouring all his emotions into the kiss, melting away Edward's doubts with actions. "Does this feel real enough for you?" Thomas asked, his eyes shining like midnight stars. Edward nodded. "Don't leave me again, Eddie. I really can't take it. After your discharge, I'll court you properly. I'll never let you doubt your worth again. You are the only partner I wish for, my heart, my light in the darkness. I want you in my life forever." "All right," Edward smiled brightly. "Let's live well together." The end.